But, you know, it's an interesting conversation we're having. How are South Africans seen in the continent? In fact, people don't like us. And that's one, understandable, because we're the last chunk of the sub-Saharan economy. And if you know, are like the United States, you know, you can upset a lot of people because of your size. And size matters in the economy. And so look at the grand saga we had about the election of a new commissioner to head the African Union. It upset a lot of people. Because normally the sort of unwritten rule in politics is that none of the major economies should have a candidate leading the African Union. It's tended to be people from smaller countries, so that people are not saying that you're using your size, population size, economic size, to move things in the continent. So, and you know, and I think listening to what you said, Sim, and walking through a car park, we sit here in this bubble of the first world universe. You know, but 20 minutes from here are 200,000 people living in absolute poverty and squalor, where education doesn't really function, where health facilities are not delivering what they're supposed to be delivering to the people, and where there's anger about the fact that this great disparity in wealth, an obscene disparity in wealth, exists within our country and exists within our continent. And if we don't build a strategy of shared growth that provides pathways of opportunity for people to leave poverty, then it will explode in our faces. And if we don't build a strategy of shared growth that provides pathways of opportunity for people to leave poverty, then it will explode in our faces. Because what is, you know, let's talk about one of the assets that we have in Africa. It's our population. What is the population of Africa? Today, anything between 800 million and a billion. Let's take it at 1 billion people. Half that population is under 19. You know, I mean, if you just talk about who's leading our countries, I mean, the average age is closer to 70. You know, we have someone next door starting his 7th term at past 80. Less phones in sub-Saharan Africa than the island of Manhattan. And we were last on the list of priorities for a government anywhere in Africa, because there is the demand for houses and water and sanitation and electricity, and so you came at the end of the long queue of demands. And what we understood with that was that the private sector was funding that infrastructure in many parts of the world. And how would we be able to create private sector investment into telecommunications? It meant dealing with a fundamental fact of creating certainty and predictability for private investors. But we had the opportunity to use policy. What is our profile of the population in Africa? Well, by 2035, our workforce will be bigger than that of China or India. By 2050, we have 2 billion people on this continent. And of those 2 billion people, we will be 1/4 of the working age population of the world. By the end of this century, half the young people in the world will be African. Now that's a demographic dividend when an entire world, the developed world, is aging. China is aging. So is Europe. So is North America. I was with a Brazilian friend yesterday. So how will you sustain that social security net that you built, Bolshevik Familial, that has taken 30 million people out of poverty? And so what I'm saying is that if we understand the assets we have, and we understand that our advantage of young people, how would we match these assets and leverage them to a better outcome? Because if we do not create those pathways for young people out of poverty, then what will happen is that they will become our demographic nightmare. It will become the time bomb that will explode on us. And that's why I come back to this thing of when we talk of Africa rising, whose Africa is rising? The cost of solving malnutrition is minuscule compared to the later healthcare costs the society will face. Because undernutrition, particularly in the first 1,000 days, when a woman falls pregnant to 2 years, is linked to obesity, hypertension, cardiovascular, and bone diseases. So society pays much more later in life than doing it earlier. But let's look at the skill profile of the university graduates that we produce, where one of our greatest assets is agriculture and land. Only 2% of graduates specialize in agriculture. Why can't the rest of you do that? Why are we afraid to challenge this abuse of power? And that's why we set up the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, to focus on building governance. Because ultimately, what is governance? Governance is not some academic course you take in some university. You know, the way we've understood governance is that at the heart of the democratic transformation we want to see in the continent, whether that's economic development, whether it's social cohesion, lies the issue of governance and leadership. And so, it's about transparency. It's about accountability, not just of governments, but of private sector organizations, of the trade unions, of the NGOs. And that's really worrying for us. Because Africa either swims together or it will sink. You know, if you're living in a bad neighborhood, man, you're going to have trouble. And so it matters to us what happens in Zimbabwe, what happens in Swaziland. It matters to us what happens in DRC or in Cote d'Ivoire. Part of the statistics we had done when I sat as part of a global commission of the World Bank on why do states fail, is states that go through civil conflict, civil war, take on average 25 to 30 years to recover to their pre-Civil War GDP productivity. So we know that that is dangerous. What's hopefully the statistics is showing us is that interstate wars are declining, but intrastate conflict is rising. And that's really problematic for us. What is the integration question is really fundamentally important. Africa still acts as 54 separate economies and countries. It weakens our bargaining position. So we have this false debate about Washington consensus versus the Beijing consensus, and every country that does investment within Africa has an agenda. Let's not be naive about that. The question is, what is Africa's agenda in engaging the rest of the world, whether that's United States, China, India, Europe, whatever? What is our agenda? How do we leverage our assets? How do we build our bargaining power? And that's where some of our greatest challenges are. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know to get through Bay Bridge and intra-African trade, how many bribes you have to pay, what obstacles and barriers there are. So until we get to a point of governance of saying, how do we build integration, how do we build the infrastructure that will facilitate economic development across the continent, we will remain, in a sense, underdeveloped. And we will remain, even though we're one of the richest continents in the world, we'll remain very poor.